All the time in my head. I was like, I don't even want to feed you. Piss me off.
Oh, shoot. I'm in your way.
Oh, no, that's fine.
This is that one here, I think.
Just like the last 10 pages.
Here we go. Good. So I can put this down. Yes. Are you going first now? Or you guys?
Yes,
You're going
yes,
first.
yes.
Okay. Okay. Looks like we're all back. Before I forget, I promised a few of you last week that I would give you feedback on your oral presentations you've done so far. I didn't deliver on that promise. So I'm going to reissue the promise, but in a more global fashion. Maybe that would shame me in doing it. This next week, I will get you some feedback on the work that you've done in your oral presentations. And I apologize that it's been a while, taking me a while to do. Okay, so Ramesh is going to start us off. I'm going to start your clock. You've got 10 minutes.
Okay.
All right.
All right. So we were asked to make either strong claims or weak claims. So I'm going to start with a strong claim. And the claim is, I'm an engineer, I have to put up a graph. The claim is that the rise of the self is inextricably intertwined with the demise of God. And viewed in this light, Satan's defiant claim that it is better to reign in hell than serve in heaven is better read as a pitch for self-actualization than as blasphemy. And in this talk, I'll describe Locke's role in this evolution as we go down this path. So one of the things that claims that the conflict between Descartes and Locke was created by God. Actually, it was created by the notion of God. Let me explain what I mean by that. Descartes dedicated his meditations to the Sorbonne as follows. The Lateran Council condemns those who hold that the soul dies with the body and explicitly commands Christian philosophers to defeat their arguments. I have not hesitated to take on this challenge. In taking up this cause espoused by Leo X, this soldier of Christ, as the Jesuits are sometimes called, went to war with Donald Rumsfeld's dictum in mind. You go to war with the army you have, not the army you want. And the weapon that this master of geometry was going to use as he moved from postulates to the role of postulant was that of deduction. But deduction requires axioms, and in his case, God was the first principles. In other words, an innate idea. This stands in contrast to the inductive approach of Locke. Okay? And Locke writes, whence does the mind have all the materials of reason and knowledge? To this, I answer in one word, from experience. But is there really a conflict between this inductive and deductive approach? Consider this year's Nobel Prize. The Nobel Prize is not awarded for theories, it's awarded for discoveries. So this time it is awarded for the so-called God particle. It was postulated by Higgs in 1964, the inductive approach. But its presence was confirmed this year by the Large Hadron Collider, the deductive approach, which begs the question, which came first, Higgs or the boson? Okay. And remember, I've got this graph going, right? So there's a steady erosion as we go over time, and I'm going to talk about the erosion of God. Let's start with the certainty of Augustine. I know that when I came into this world, all the comforts which your mercy provides were there ready for me. He's absolutely certain. All this I have learned since then because all the gifts you have given me, both spiritual and material, proclaim the truth of it. And now from there we move to Descartes, who, remember, he set out to defend God and it ended up doing the opposite. Pascal would say, I cannot forgive Descartes. In all his philosophy, he did his best to dispense with God. But he could not avoid making him set the world in motion with a flip of his thumbs. After that, he had no more use for God. Ruth Tucker, in a biographical history of the Christian Church, writes that Pascal recognized that Descartes' philosophy was more toxic to the faith than outright atheism would have been. To have a distant, mechanistic God was no better than having no God at all. But it's ironic that after beating up Descartes for his innate ideas, and he spends the first chapter doing that, our master of experiential induction should take God himself, takes God as a first principle, with no proof at all. When he writes, I grant the existence of God in so many ways manifest, and the obedience we owe him so congruous to the light of reason. What's his proof? And when he writes further that I cannot see how any man should transgress those moral rules with confidence and serenity, were they innate, it makes me wonder, was he questioning innateness or was he questioning God? So we'll move on to the erosion of absolutes. Augustine writes, seek for yourself, O man, search for your true self. He who seeks shall find himself in God. So there is a true self to be found. Okay, so we have somewhere to get. It may take time, but there is somewhere to get, and that somewhere is absolute, divine, unchanging. It's a creation of God. Now, when we move to Locke, we recognize that we may never get there, right? So Locke, on the other hand, says that it will be no excuse for an idle and untoward servant who could not attend to his business by candlelight to plead that he has not brought sunshine. The candle that is set up in us shines brightly enough for our purposes, which means that we're never going to get there, but whatever we have, it's not bad. It will do. Okay? Our business, in fact, that's the primary purpose for writing this essay. He says, our business here is not to know all things, but to those which concern our conduct. This was that which first gave rise to this essay concerning understanding. But what's the transition as we go beyond Locke? Okay, the first guy said there is we know where we're going. The second guy says, well, we may never get there. But what's even worse? What if there is no there, right? And that comes to Gödel in 1931. And what the incompleteness theorem says, and I'm no mathematician here, but roughly it says that in any sufficiently complex system of mathematics, there are propositions that you can prove to be neither true nor false. So even in mathematics, which is so pure, you can start with everything, you still may not end up knowing everything. And this leads us to the physics equivalent of this, which is Heisenberg's uncertainty principle, which said that you cannot with precision know both the location and the speed of a particle at any point in time. Which means if you don't know the present, right, you can't know both the location and the speed with certainty, how will you know the future? This is very worrying, and in fact it led Einstein to say, God does not play dice. Right? He could not deal with the randomness of the universe. And if you go on to read Hawking, Hawking says, well, God is also subject to the uncertainty principle. So is there a there finally? And we'll move to the erosion of constancy. Right? So in earlier class, we've discussed questions like, feel like somebody said, I'm not myself today, or she's not herself anymore, or something like that. Now, over the years, the self has evolved from a more static to a dynamic entity. Now, Montaigne recognized this even though he wasn't comfortable with it. He writes, anyone who turns his prime attention to himself will hardly ever find himself in the same state twice. I give my soul this face or that, depending on which side I lay down on. I speak about myself in diverse ways. This is because I look at myself in diverse ways. Every sort of contradiction can be found in me, depending on some twist or attribute, timid, insolent, chaste, lecherous, talkative, taciturn, goes on. And the way he rationalizes, remember, he recognized it, but he didn't quite like it. And his response is more of a statistician's response, like averaging over time. What does he say? That is why, to judge a man, we must follow his tracks long and carefully. Okay. But let's go on from there to Locke. From Locke says, the senses at first let in particular ideas and furnish the yet empty cabinet. The mind by degrees goes familiar with them, right? So this cabinet, this is his self, is being furnished by experiences. But what's important is what's left unsaid. If it could be furnished, by the same token, could be unfurnished. Right? Because he goes on, for if we take away wholly all consciousness of our actions and sensations, especially of pleasure and pain, and the concernment that accompanies it, it will be hard to know wherein to place personal identity. Right? So Locke's connection of personal identity, which is almost like stimulus response, lays open a problem that does the self change as the stimuli and the responses change? In fact, let's go to Joyce's, which we started with. Bloom in Joyce seems to be all stimulus and response. Kidneys were in his mind as he moved about the kitchen softly, writing up breakfast things on the humpy tray. Gelid light and air were in the kitchen, but out of doors, gentle summer morning everywhere. Made him feel a bit peckish. And goes on, the shiny links packed with force meat fed his gaze as he breathed in tranquilly the lukewarm breath of cooked spicy pig's blood. And I'd leave you with the last one here is, we said, go, I think, therefore I am. But consider the converse for a moment. Okay? I think not, therefore I am not. Right? And in fact, this is a terrifying possibility that Shakespeare suggests in The Seven Ages of Man, which is what I put up there. Last scene of all that ends this strange eventful history is second childishness and mere oblivion, sans teeth, sans eyes, sans taste, sans everything. And I'll leave you last with, we've got 2 minutes more, we'll switch this to the modern world. How has this transition occurred? Okay, and how is as we see, the demise of God has led to the rise of the self. This is 1945. Oppenheimer, the first atomic bomb. And what does he say? Now I am become death, the destroyer of worlds. He's quoting Krishna from the Bhagavad Gita, right? This is his image of the self. I mean, compared to that, Satan's rebellion was like a toddler's tantrum compared to this guy, right? And 2 last words. One which Steinbeck claimed was the most important word ever. Right? So if you go to the East of Eden, there's the ending passages of the East of Eden. The word that Steinbeck comes up with is Tim Shell. But remember why he says that. So I'll read out the last piece. Lee's hands shook as he filled the delicate cups. He drank his down in one gulp. Don't you see, he cried. The American Standard Translation orders men to triumph over sin. And you can call sin ignorance, and I'm going to say ignorance of the self. The King James translation makes a promise, in thou shalt, meaning that men will surely triumph over sin. But the Hebrew word, the word timshel, thou mayest, that gives us a choice. It may be the most important word in the world. It says the way is open. That throws it right back on a man. For if thou mayest, why? Thou mayest not. Why? That makes a man great. That gives him stature with the gods. For in his weakness and his filth and the murder of his brother, he still has great choice. And the last word comes, of course, from 1971. And I'll leave you with that, which is...
No hell below us, above us only sky.